I often thought that I should have had some investment in Depends because nobody could be with Tim.
America fell in love with Carol Burnett for the easy laugh, the raised eyebrow that disarmed tension, the closing wave that felt like a promise that everything would be okay. That part of the story is true, but the longer version is sharper. Behind the warmth was a leader who knew exactly when to tighten the reins, when to push back, and when to let the silence do the talking. Sets ran on rhythm because someone guarded the rhythm. Reputations held because someone defended the name on the door. The most revealing moments weren't the standing ovations. They were the lines she drew when the spotlight wasn't looking. A rehearsal that snapped from jokes to judgment. A headline that demanded an answer. A closed door that stayed closed, even when it would have been easier to smile through it. The smile never left, but the boundaries didn't either. That combination, more than any sketch or song, is why her legend still feels alive. Harvey Korman. By the 7th season, the show moved like clockwork. Sketches tightening in rehearsal and blooming in front of the crowd, cameras sliding into place like choreography, and the orchestra landing every sting with a smile. At the center of that controlled chaos stood Carol Burnett, the person who could flip the room from nerves to focus with a glance. She wasn't barking orders, she was conducting energy. Writers trusted her timing, performers trusted her instincts, and the crew trusted that if the day went sideways, she would steady it without turning the set into a battlefield. Then a rehearsal cracked the varnish. Harvey Korman, famously precise, gloriously dry, let a miscue turn into a monologue of frustration that ricocheted off the rafters. A missed light here, a late cue there, and suddenly the barbs were aimed at the people who made the magic look effortless. You could feel the air change, jokes cooling on the tray, side conversations snapping shut, the crew absorbing the sting in tense silence. It wasn't cruelty so much as a slip, one of those moments when pressure outruns grace. But on this set, tone mattered as much as punchlines. Carol Burnett didn't counter with theatrics. She closed her script, crossed the stage with that composed, almost unhurried walk of hers, and drew the line so clearly it might as well have been taped on the floor. Respect wasn't a courtesy to be extended when convenient. It was the price of admission for everyone, from headliners to hands on the dimmer board. She addressed the storm without naming and shaming, the way a good captain lowers the wind, simply by standing at the wheel. In that quiet firmness was the message. The laugh is sacred, and so are the people who earn it. The ripple moved through the day like a weather front. At the next table read, one chair stayed empty, and the whispernet lit up backstage. Had the show really sidelined Harvey Korman? No fireworks, no public spectacle, just absence, and the lesson that absence can teach. The crew tightened their work as they always did, but their shoulders eased. They'd been seen and defended. Even Carol's closest collaborators noticed the recalibration. This was leadership without a speech, a boundary set once and then kept. By week's end, the reset arrived the right way. Harvey Korman came back into the room, not to reclaim a throne but to restore a culture. He apologized to Carol, to the crew, and to the week's guests, Petula Clark and Tim Conway, whose names carry a lot of sparkle and just as much nerves when the red light's about to go on. It wasn't flowery or defensive, it was adult, and it was enough. The apology didn't erase the moment, it rewrote the ending. The rhythm returned, and the show could breathe again. What endured wasn't the flare-up, it was the architecture revealed by it. Carol Burnett proved that warmth isn't the absence of conflict, it's the way you handle conflict without poisoning the well. The laughs sounded the same to viewers, but everyone on that stage understood the scaffolding that held them up. Standards, grace, and a leader who would choose both every time. The National Enquirer. It started, as these things often do, with a few careless lines in a tabloid column, just enough ink to stain a reputation. Carol Burnett had spent years building a public image anchored in empathy and restraint, and then a brief item suggested a version of her that didn't square with any of it. The piece wasn't a critique of a sketch or a lampoon of a character. It implied personal misbehavior in a public place, dragging in the name of Henry Kissinger to heighten the intrigue. To most readers, it was a 1-minute read on a grocery checkout rack. To someone whose name is also her livelihood, it was a slow burn that didn't go away when the page turned. Burnett made a choice few celebrities risk. She refused to shrug and let the cycle move on. With counsel at her side, she filed a libel suit against the National Enquirer, turning a rumor into a legal record. That decision carried real stakes. Courtrooms are loud in their own way. Depositions, transcripts, exhibits, and they often keep a story alive longer than the magazine that printed it. But the filing said something bigger than the headline ever did. The right to a career includes the right not to have your character casually rewritten by strangers with a deadline to meet. The case forced everything into focus. Editors and writers sat for questions. Lawyers argued about intent. harm, and the thin line between colorful and reckless. A jury weighed not just whether the item was wrong, but whether it was wrong enough, careless enough, damaging enough to cross the law's threshold. Burnett didn't stage press conferences or wage a public crusade. She let the process do what it does best when it's allowed: slow down, identify facts, and pin responsibility to decisions rather than vibes. Verdicts and appeals followed, and the numbers shifted. Headlines about awards, reductions, and final amounts that looked small to some and symbolic to others. But the most important outcome wasn't a check, it was a precedent in the culture. The tabloid got a lesson in where just asking questions ends and accountability begins. The industry noticed. Even readers who loved their weekly dose of spice felt the ground move a little under the racks. The human beings in those columns weren't props, and sometimes they pushed back. For Burnett, the win was measured less in dollars than in boundaries. She had never sold herself as flawless, she had sold honesty. Defending that wasn't a detour from the brand, it was the brand. The suit told future editors that a kind public figure might also be the most dangerous opponent, because kindness isn't a lack of options, it's the discipline to use the right ones. When the dust settled, the item faded into the archive, and the lesson stayed where it mattered most, in the editorial meetings that decide which shortcuts aren't worth the risk. What lingered, especially for people who work with her, was how she carried the fight. Calm, steady, uninterested in theatrics. She didn't try to erase the existence of tabloids. She insisted that if you print a portrait, it needs to look like the person. The next time a flimsy story crossed a desk, someone in that room remembered this case, and a paragraph quietly died before it could do harm. That's not vengeance, that's culture change. Lorne Michaels. For half a century, a strange blank spot sat in the middle of TV history. Carol Burnett never hosted Saturday Night Live. It wasn't for lack of stature. She'd already defined the template. SNL's cast would grow up studying live sketches, character work, musical turns, yet the invitation never arrived. Fans noticed, so did reporters. The absence turned into a question that kept echoing. Was this just a scheduling quirk stretched over decades, or something more telling about who gets welcomed through a particular door? In 2025, the quiet question finally got a microphone. In a profile, Burnett wondered aloud about Lorne Michaels. "I don't know what I did to upset that man. Do you think it's misogynistic?" It wasn't an accusation hurled in anger. It was a measured, slightly weary curiosity from someone who spent a lifetime giving others the benefit of the doubt. The line traveled fast because it felt like what everyone tiptoed around for years, the possibility that a foundational woman in sketch comedy simply wasn't seen as belonging to the new club. Context piled on. Coverage resurfaced the long-running narrative that SNL defined itself as edgier, more rebellious rock and roll, where Burnett's Variety Hour read Broadway. That branding difference, repeated often enough, can harden into a wall, a tidy excuse that disguises a gate. Press summaries pointed to the quote and to the basic stubborn fact: 5 decades, 0 host invitations, while noting she did make a brief appearance way back in 1985. The contrast between the scale of her influence and the size of that cameo made the snub feel even odder. Michaels has never offered a specific public explanation about Burnett's never-hosted status. The show's general line is that choices vary with the season's tone and needs. Fair enough as a policy, less convincing as a half-century pattern. Meanwhile, the rest of television has had no trouble celebrating her tributes, lifetime awards, and a steady stream of younger comics calling her a North Star. The more the industry saluted her, the stranger the silence on 30 Rock's 8th floor sounded. Burnett, for her part, kept the tone light and self-possessed. She suggested she wouldn't be interested in hosting now, which doubles as a tidy boundary and a graceful closer. If a door wanted to be opened, it should have been opened when it mattered. That posture fits her larger pattern. Name the thing once, then move on with the work. The audience understood the subtext. A legend shouldn't have to ask. What remains is the lesson. Institutions are comfortable telling stories about themselves, who they're for, what they value, which traditions they honor. Sometimes those stories miss the person who made the tradition possible. Burnett's question didn't demand an apology. It asked for a better story, one where influence and respect line up. If the industry is listening, it's an easy rewrite. Joe Hamilton. Before the lawyers ever drew a line, the audience drew one with laughter. The family sketches, Eunice with her raw nerves, Mama with that volcanic bark, Ed with his wounded pride, hit so hard because they felt lived in. They weren't just bits. They were a little American tragic comedy that kept outgrowing the 4 walls of a living room set. With characters that sticky, the next step was obvious: build a world around them. Obvious, however, isn't the same as simple. On paper, Joe Hamilton had a producer's mandate to turn heat into television. On stage, Carol Burnett had shaped those people with her body and timing until they breathed on their own. The lines between marriage, authorship, and production blurred the way they always do when the same dinner table hosts both contract talk and table reads. Who owned the characters? Who approved what? How did royalties flow if a sketch family moved into its own house and kept the lights on for years? As a spin-off took shape, Mama's Family, the questions stopped being hypothetical. Contracts spoke in a different register than affection. Meetings that used to be creative turned procedural. Attorneys did what attorneys do, pin down rights, percentages, credits, participation. Burnett wasn't fighting to hoard something. She was asking that the thing born on her stage not be treated like just another asset crossing a spreadsheet. Hamilton wasn't the villain. He was the producer protecting a show he intended to shepherd. Those positions weren't irreconcilable, but they rubbed. When the marriage ended, the business had to be separated too. Divorce doesn't only divide houses, it divides catalogs, options, even the right to show up in a world you helped invent. Some decisions favored continuity. Mama's Family moved forward with Vicki Lawrence at the center, flanked by collaborators who knew the rhythms. Some decisions favored clean lines, how names, likenesses, and profits would be handled without reopening the same argument every season. No explosions, just the heavy quiet of a partnership turning into paperwork. In the aftermath, Burnett chose presence on her terms, guest turns when it served the story, distance when it served the boundary. The work didn't sour, it evolved. Ken Barry found his gentle groove, Tim Conway dropped in with that elastic mischief of his, and Lawrence carried the matriarch like a championship belt. Meanwhile, Burnett focused on projects that didn't ask her to keep renegotiating the past. Everyone kept eating because the audience kept caring. What stayed with her wasn't bitterness, it was a handbook. Love and work can share a roof, but they need separate rooms with labeled keys. If characters are family, families still write wills. The lesson rhymes with every other chapter of her career. Be generous, and also be clear. The joke lands better when the contracts do. Marlon Brando. Some stories sound apocryphal until you hear the cadence of them, the way small details refuse to be dramatic. Late night, a landline, a voice you recognize before the name. Carol Burnett picked up because in those days, you still picked up. The world hadn't learned to hide behind voicemail yet. On the other end was Marlon Brando, unhurried and unmistakable, dropping into her quiet like a scene partner who entered from the wrong set. The first minutes were strangely ordinary. He'd caught a rerun, he admired the craft, he had a question that was practical rather than grand, something about a doctor's name, a procedure someone he knew might need. The house was mostly dark. A housekeeper had woken Carol, thinking the call might be from the network. For a beat it felt like a wrong number corrected by fate. Then the conversation stretched into that peculiar space where two icons compare notes as civilians. Brando talked the way great actors do when there isn't a camera to feed, sideways, circling, landing on a line that feels tossed off and then lingers. He asked about timing and character, about how she makes a room lean forward without pushing. Carol, polite to a fault and curious by nature, answered as long as made sense, then longer than that, because this was Marlon Brando, and it's hard to end a call that already feels like a story you'll tell badly if you cut it short. And yet boundaries are boundaries, even at 3 a.m. She eased a handbrake into the talk, an early call, a long day ahead, grateful, bemused, and ready to reclaim the quiet. No slammed receivers, no offended huff, just the gentle exit of a person who knows both the value of access and the cost of letting it run your life. The phone clicked, and the house went back to being a house instead of a switchboard for Hollywood's strangest small talk. By morning, the tale had acquired wings it didn't ask for. A friend heard a version, a columnist polished it. What had felt intimate and almost silly, two famous people sharing a midnight bubble, became louder in print than it ever was in the room. Carol did what she's always done when attention misreads intent. She declined to add spice. She let the oddness stand as oddness and moved on. The takeaway wasn't scandal, it was tone. Even when the surreal knocks, you get to decide how surreal your life becomes. Carol's dignity didn't require distance, it required choices. One night, one call, one neat reminder that fame is a costume you can hang up between scenes. Family Guy, there's a special kind of whiplash that comes from seeing a character you built with love reappear in a different decade wearing someone else's grin. For Carol Burnett, that moment arrived when an animated series took her most iconic figure, the mop-wielding charwoman, and dropped her into a gag calibrated for modern shock laughs. The bit was brief, the tone flippant, and the implication clear. In the internet age, everything is referenceable, remixable, fair game. Burnett didn't treat it as a cute misunderstanding. She'd guarded that character for decades, not as porcelain but as craft. The charwoman was a working-class poem told without speeches, a posture, a shuffle, a glance up that made audiences feel seen. Watching her turned into a dartboard felt to Burnett less like homage and more like taking the coat off a hook and wearing it to a party without asking. She took it to court. The legal arena has its own language, and parody sits right in the middle of it. The defense argued transformation and commentary, the classic fair use pillars. Burnett's side argued misappropriation and disrespect to a signature persona. Judges weighed intent, context, and whether the new work said something about the old or simply used it as a prop. In the end, the case was dismissed, a reminder that modern satire often earns wide legal latitude, even when it bruises the people who made the originals we love. If that sounds like a loss, look closer at Burnett's pattern. She doesn't chase Pyrrhic victories, she plants flags. The filing itself drew a bright line for future writers' rooms. You can parody, but you can't pretend the characters you borrow are unowned, uncherished, uncostly. The message reached the only place that matters in the long run, the creative process, where a single "let's rethink that beat" can prevent lazy borrowing from masquerading as bold comedy. And culturally, the moment clarified her brand for a new generation. She wasn't scolding the future, she was asking it to aim higher. If you're going to swing at a legend, make the joke worth the bruise. When the dust settled, the charwoman didn't shrink. She stood where she has always stood, a quiet, sturdy figure who earns laughs by honoring ordinary people. The legal record may have favored the cartoon, but the court of taste kept Burnett exactly where she'd been, respected, and more importantly, respected for the right reasons. Carol Burnett's legend rests on more than charm, it's discipline disguised as warmth. When a trusted partner cracked, she protected the culture without theatrics. When a tabloid tried to rewrite her character, she answered where facts matter. When an iconic stage stayed closed to her, she named the gap and kept her dignity. When a signature character was borrowed too loosely, she drew a legal line so future writers would think before they lift. That's the through line. Generosity as default, boundaries as policy, and results as the final word. It's why the sketches still breathe, why peers and protégés call her a compass, and why audiences feel not just entertained but respected. Which moment most reshaped your view of Carol Burnett? The rehearsal stand, the tabloid fight, or the SNL silence? Drop your take below. And if you want more sharp, respectful deep dives into Hollywood history, tap subscribe for the next one.